First of all, congratulations on the release of 40 number one hits. An amazing feat for an entire career, let alone for someone like yourself in the middle of a career.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. To get to 40 number one hits, it's surprising to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure. Not to us, though. I mean, the music's quite amazing, as we all know. The new collection features features all your hits plus a couple of new songs. "Living on Love," I believe, in Time.
Time, Love, and Money.
Time, Love, and Money.
Yes.
Produced by Scott Hendricks, someone who you wanted to work with for a while, I understand.
I sure did. I've known Scott a long time. Everybody loved Scott in Nashville. He was a tremendous recording engineer and now heads Virgin Records in Nashville. And I guess I was looking for somebody that knows working in the recording studio, that knew more about it than I know. You know, because I had my own studio on Music Row in Nashville for 20 years, and I basically dabbled and played around with a lot of different things under the format of what's called country music. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do that. But I always wanted to work with Scott, and when he said, "Man, we got to get together and do this project," and we had it, found out that it was possible to get all the RCA catalog that I had done, those 40 number one hits, and actually get the original masters. Right. And restore those with an engineer friend of mine that I've known for 25 years to actually make some of these sound quite a bit better than they did originally, because a lot of them were just out on vinyl when some of them hadn't even been out on digital yet. So with the 40 number one hits, and I think there's one on here, "A Stranger in My House," that topped out around number 2, because at that time in country radio there was a guitar solo in there. They said, "Ronnie, that's a little bit too much like Led Zeppelin. I'm not sure if we're supposed to play this on country music or not." So that's on this album, and these 2 new songs that Scott and I have done. It's a tremendous album.
What do you think Scott brought to the project that wouldn't otherwise have been there? I mean, especially with the recording of those 2 songs, the new ones.
I just think he understands today's country music probably better than I do. Now, I've been making records in Nashville since 1973, so a lot of those earlier records, you know, I walked in the studio with the band, step up to the mic, sing the song, and you walk out, and there's the record. You know, there's very little you can do. There's no mixing. So then I got into having my own recording studio, and then it went to 16 track to 24 track to 32 track, and then it went 2 32 track machines together. And what Scott does is it's all done on hard disk, so it's as many tracks as you want, and it's 24-bit digital. But I think Scott understands what the songs are in today's country, maybe possibly better than I do. He said, the first thing that he said is, that my music, the one thing that Ronnie Milsap is in competition with himself, because all those years you've done these things, you've had so many hits for so long, you're constantly in competition with yourself, and we need to find some way to reinvent you. And I just love his energy, and there's an odd combination of somebody that is really a great commander and is a real nice guy at the same time. A few people like that, man. That's an amazing quality about somebody. But that's the way I feel about Scott. And he's heard the stories about how I would stay up for 3 or 4 days working on one song without sleep and all that. So he knew all those crazy things that I would probably do in a recording studio, right. And he was ready to do the same kind of stuff. So it was a tremendous amount of fun working with him. We look forward to doing more.
You brought up an interesting point a few seconds ago when you were talking about how through your career the technology has evolved to create a different manner in which you record. Do you think there are any advantages to regressing and recording in a simpler way than, more like when you first started out in Nashville?
I revisit all those ideas because I think there's a lot to be learned by some of the techniques that we used in the past, and I certainly love a lot of those. I think there's a lot to be gained by the technology of today. So it's always the mix, to me, of the people who know what the tools are today, but they still know what to keep You know, it's like tube technology. We're not, you know, some people would throw that away, but in the recording studio, there are a lot of us guys that are kind of crazy about that and nutty about that because we love our tube microphones, or we love our tube compressors, or whatever pieces of gear. So I think it's really, it's always the mix of what's possible today, but don't give up the good things that we've done in the past. You know.
That's very, very well said. Let me back up a little bit here. I want to go back to when you were a boy, I guess. And how old were you when you first entered the Moorhead School?
Well, I was in Western North Carolina. I was born blind. I was living with my grandparents and my father, who had basically separated. So I was in an area, you know, where you turn the radio on and you hear a lot of country, a lot of bluegrass, a lot of gospel music. I remember certainly the first time I remember singing was in church. And then they told me that you're not going to be able to go to school here. You need to go to a special school in Raleigh, North Carolina. That was 400 miles away.
That must have been scary.
And at 6 years old to be taken to that particular school, and that school, Governor Moorhead School in Raleigh, is a wonderful school for blind children. But at 6 years old, I got to tell you, it was really hard, and you know, hard in many ways. So you survive. You know, you find ways. Fortunately, I made a lot of friends with the students. I remember the first students that I met, actually the first day that I was there. And a lot of those folks, we stay in touch with each other today, so we're still friends. But from Flatt and Scruggs and Bill Monroe and the Stanley Brothers and all the great bluegrass music to Mozart, Bach, and Beethoven. Now, folks, we had a great music department over at the Governor Moorhead School for the Blind, but they would not tolerate anything but classical music. So it was a real culture change in many ways when I entered the school in Raleigh.
How did they discover that you had this musical gift? Because you were put into classes by the teachers there, right?
Well, they had somehow discovered, I guess, that certain students had aptitude for music. I just know that one day I was 7 years old, and they said, "Will the following students please report for violin lessons?" You know, and my name was on that list. And you know, I knew what a fiddle was from growing up in the Smoky Mountains of Western North Carolina, but I don't know that I'd actually heard the term violin. You know, there were a lot of things that I didn't know until I went to this particular school in Raleigh. So I think they found out once they discovered too that, you know, certain students did well in violin. Then I was moved, you know, into piano classes started 8 years old.
Did you want to study classical music at that point? Do you remember?
No, I didn't. I had to trust them on that because I really loved other kinds of music better. And it's amazing, they were right. They were absolutely right.
So?
And I just believe it was a tremendous background in classical music to have to learn all that and all the techniques and all those great years of studying piano and playing competition as a teenager, as a classical musician. That was another lifetime, Albert. You know, I don't do very much of that today, but it was tremendous learning process. And the teachers, and you know, not only in the music classes at Governor Moorhead in Raleigh, the whole school, all the academic background that we have, very strong, very powerful academic study there. And that's why I've survived. You know, all the things that they taught me, that's why I've survived. Because the first thing they taught us, I had a violin teacher named Wallace Greaves when I was 7 years old. And he was very big on you know, teaching you things, and we had to memorize all these things before we'd learned Braille, but we had not actually had exposure to Braille music yet. So we were still working a lot from memory, and so he would teach us these passages, and we would memorize them and play them.
Mm-hmm.
And he would kind of grade you on those things, and and he was real tough, real hard, and he was big on basically telling you that you better learn to take care of yourself, because he was the first one, I think, that really kind of made you dig deep to know that that you're going to have some skills in life to be able to make it, you know.
At what point did you realize you wanted to make music your career?
Well, you know, I was going through all this classical music in school in Raleigh, and no outlet to play the kind of music that we wanted to play. I remember the day the music died, which was February the 3rd, 1959. I was in a practice hall practicing, supposed to be playing my classical music, and some friends of mine, we were in there playing Buddy Holly songs and Big Bopper songs and Jerry Lee Lewis songs. And the music teacher came in and said, "Hold it! You're out of the music department. We're going to dismiss you. You're expelled from the music department."
Whoa.
Which was pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Well, they did that for the rest of the year, and then we were allowed to come back early the next year when we came back to school. The point of it is, we didn't have an outlet for our kind of music, but eventually, because of that, they knew we wanted to play songs that we were writing, things that we were working on. So they finally allowed us to put this little band together in high school while I was still in Raleigh, called the Apparitions.
Right.
And we had a gentleman named Chuck Langley on drums, and Larry Atwell played bass, and Jay Spell, a good friend of mine, played piano. I played guitar and sang in that group. And that's the first time we actually had a time to work on our own music, and had the support of the faculty of the school, which was incredible, you know. And I thought I wanted to be in music, and my counselors were, you know, I'd made good grades in high school, I wanted to go into college, and they were going to support my college education, and basically on scholarship to go anywhere to college. I said, well, I'd love to study music, and they said, no, you can't do that, because you might wind up out on the street, and you might be a liability to the state, so we can't allow you to do that. You got to think of something else to study. So I thought, well, an academic career would be fine, you know, maybe how about law school? I'd love to go to that, you know, maybe that'd be fun. They said, okay, that's cool. So I wound up leaving North Carolina and going over to Georgia. I was wanting to just do something different, get out of state or something, you know. They said, and a lot of my friends from Western North Carolina, right across the state line in Georgia, there was a college named Young Harris Junior College, and I could go there for 2 years and then go on to Emory in Atlanta and study pre-law, and then go on to law school. I met a guy in Young Harris that turned out to be one of the most incredible teachers that I've ever had. He had, again, he just motivated you to reach beyond yourself. It's just one of those teachers, you know, that you just couldn't wait to get in there and for the next day's class. He was that kind of guy, man. And
he set you back on your path towards music?
Well, no. This guy was almost had me convinced to go for an academic career, because he was so good. He taught political science. He's gone on to become governor of Georgia for 2 times, Zell Miller, and he's just an incredible man. And he almost had me convinced to go on with an academic career. But I was hanging out in Atlanta in a lot of these nightclubs, and one particular nightclub that I was going to, I got a chance the first time to meet Jackie Wilson. And at I'd go in there and play a couple of songs with the band, and I met Jackie, and he said, "Man, you sound good." and then I got to meet Benny King, and some of these other great rhythm and blues singers. I didn't know Chet Atkins or Owen Bradley or any of the Nashville producers. I just know that Marvin Gaye said, "Sounds great." I got to meet a lot of these folks that came through here and played a one-nighter at this particular club in Atlanta called the Royal Peacock Club.
Mm-hmm.
And when all I needed is for those guys to say, "Man, you need to be in music." That's all I needed. So there went my academic life, So I finished my 2 years of college, and I decided to just go into music full time. And I signed with a company in New York named Scepter Records that Florence Greenberg had that company. The big artist at that time was Dionne Warwick.
Mm-hmm.
And Chuck Jackson, one of my favorites from that company. And I had my first record. I had a lot of help from a disc jockey friend in Atlanta from WQXI, a gentleman named Pat Hughes, who got me to New York and allowed me to be heard by these folks. So we had this first record out on Scepter, and it was a top 5 R&B record.
This was already you as a solo artist?
Yeah, as a solo artist in 1965. A song called "Never Had It So Good," and it was on Billboard, a top 5 soul record.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, I'm doing the right thing. Man, I should be doing this. This is exactly what I need to be doing.
I think the top 5 is a good clue.
I love that. I love that. I just love that. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to continue to have top 5 records, because after that, I struggled some, and I had some that went top 40 or something on the soul chart. And my wife and I met a lady that while I was in college in Atlanta that I'm still married to today. So we'll be married 35 years this October. So we have an incredible history together. She loves music and was very supportive of this whole possibility of having a career in the music business. But we were in Atlanta for a while, and then I met a record producer named Chips Moman from Memphis, and he said, "I got a recording studio over here in Memphis, and if you'll move up there, I'll get you to play on a bunch of sessions, as a piano player." And I said, "Man, that sounds great." So we moved to Memphis, and I had a gig doing this nightclub thing, to try to make some money, some real money to take care of the rent and all that. And then I was playing on the records at the same time, and I got to work on quite a few of the artists that were coming through making records in this one particular studio called American Studios in Memphis, and including a couple albums during that time with Elvis.
Wow.
Elvis did those 2 albums in Memphis, and I got to play on them. So it was an incredible time. I got to be around Elvis, play for his private parties. The big song, "Kentucky Rain," that's the one that's played the most. I played piano on that and sang with Elvis on that. And so there was a move, hanging out in Memphis. I could play on other folks' records, but I could not get anything to happen for myself, so.
Why do you think that was? What was it about that time?
I think it was just, I don't know what the connection, as much as I was trying, to find my way in pop music or R&B.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly had a lot of chances in Memphis to do that. We just apparently didn't find the right song, or we didn't connect with the right combination of whatever it might take.
Right.
And I'd met Charlie Pride. Actually, I remember meeting him here in Los Angeles. I was staying over at the Continental Hyatt House, and my wife went down to get us something for breakfast, and she saw Charlie in the elevator, and she introduced herself and said, "God, my husband, we just love you, man. You're just incredible." And Charlie said, "Well, who is your husband?" She said, "It's Ronnie Milsap. He's playing." At that time, we were playing at another place. We just come here to Los Angeles. That was actually in 1970.
Right.
So that goes back a long time, Albert. But to make a long story short, he called the room, and I picked up the phone. I was half asleep, and he said, "Is anybody going to San Antonio or Phoenix, Arizona?" And I'm saying, "I don't know who this is, but you sure do a great imitation of Charlie Pride." And he said, "Well, this is Charlie Pride." I said, "Wow, what a pleasure, man, to meet you." So he came down and heard me, and he said, "What you ought to do is come over to Nashville. You know, your background's in country music." And I said, "Absolutely." He said, "You ought to come over to Nashville." And he introduced me to the gentleman that was his manager at that time, and I knew the guy who was administrating his publishing company. So I wound up, in December of '72, coming to Nashville, thanks to the suggestion of Charlie Pride.
Mm-hmm. And that's when you began the string of hits.
Yes.
Which began with, I believe, Pure Love was the first #1, correct?
Yes, sir.
I want to ask you something. Now, after Pure Love hit #1, did you ever, and there were subsequent hits after that, obviously, was there ever a pressure to create a song that was a #1? Did you ever feel like, well, this next one's got to be at least as good as the last one?
You know, I didn't. I must say I didn't. Because I was there in a unique time, no doubt. I never expected ever to have a #1 country record to begin with. It was a bigger dream than I'd ever dreamed in my life. And to just have one, that would be cool, you know? So I knew we were doing something very special, and I knew that there was tremendous connection between what I was trying to say with my music and the audience. And I was having a lot of help from people in Nashville, in publishers. My manager at that time was also managing Charlie Pride, as I'm mentioning, a gentleman named Jack Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And RCA, great record company, and all the supportive things that an artist has to go out and do. I just had I had a whole lot of fun doing those things. I said, "Well, we got to be out at a radio station at 6 o'clock in the morning doing something." I said, "Well, man, you know, I love this radio stuff so much. I've been a fan of radio. I would have probably hung out at the radio station anyway. You know, what they'd want me to go there anyway." So a lot of those things that an artist has to do, to those little baby steps that you got to take on a daily basis, you know, those were fun for me to do. It was surrounded by a lot of really good people, and I think I just got in the studio and had fun doing all those things we were doing, and eventually I got to thinking, well, what I'd love to do was to have my own studio, you know, where I could probably even get more detailed with sound, or maybe try some things that may not be too acceptable in a country market,
right.
But I could still, you know, nobody would fault me for just being over there if I wanted to try some songs. And so I got into my own studio. I had a couple of really great engineers, and played with that, and still maintained and still stayed true to what my country career was supposed to be. But you know, because of that, you know, you find new techniques, new songs. You stumble onto new directions, and crossover was a very despised term in the 70s in country music, and it is today.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it is.
They do the same thing now. You know, they talk about that in country today, like crossover. That hadn't happened before. Sure it has. It was happening back in the 70s when I came to country music. There were those that were upholding tradition, and then there were those that were saying, how do we feel about Charlie Rich crossing over into pop? Do we feel good about that or bad about that? And nobody knew, you know. I always think, though, that even then and today, I think that you certainly don't have to sell outside the format today. You can sell millions of records and stay inside the format, and that's a blessing. But it's also good to be able to reach out to other people. I know there are folks that mention to me at shows, they will say basically, I don't know a whole lot about country music, but I know Ronnie Milsap. Because I was into the adult contemporary charts, the pop charts, or all the different charts. I had a chance to get into those, and maybe somebody may not have been so much into country music, but they found me, and I'm grateful.
Very good. What do you think is the biggest misconception about country music today?
Boy, that's a good question, Albert. That's a great question. Oh, it is. Country music has grown so far, and I know it's still one of those things where people seem to love it or hate it. You know, I don't know exactly why that is, because I've always loved it myself. You know, and I love to see the evolution that's happened, and there's some really cool records being made in country today, I believe, and there's still honor to the tradition. And I just think it's, you know, as far as misconceptions about country music, I think mainly it comes maybe that they just maybe haven't searched that out.
Right.
I mean, it's very easy to say, I don't like something, or you know, that don't move me,
right.
or whatever. But if you take the time to, maybe you don't want to, but I'm kind of the person that I kind of like to take time to reach out. You know, maybe for me, there's certain types of music or certain types of radio that I have to work hard at appreciation. Today's television, for a blind person, let me tell you, it's much tougher. But I could follow Mission Impossible, man, when it was on CBS with no problem. No
That's right.
problem.
Those stories are
no
right
problem.
there.
But it's tougher now,
Yeah.
because it's going. You know, there's so much, all of the effects, the visual effects, and so much going on. I'm constantly asking my wife, "What's happening? What's going on? Tell me what's happening." But you know, there are misconceptions about a lot of these things. But I just think if you want to learn more about it, the people in country music, I've always felt that it's people music.
Right.
It's that's why the combination or the association between country music and rhythm and blues music, or the blues, it's very similar, because it's people talking about everyday things that's in their life. And I guess the thing that hurts me more about today's country is I want to feel a little bit more of what's going on. I think we want to do cool records, and I love doing those too, but I still believe it's all about what the music makes you feel, and I don't want any of us to forget that.
Very good. Well, very well said, Mr. Milsap.